why, and given how many of them there are as well, why is it the case that so many landlords will reject tenants that are considered higher risk? Other than the obvious fact they think it's a financial risk, is there anything else? And do you think that this guarantee, a rental guarantee of the type I'm talking about, where, let me be specific, okay, we're offering to guarantee the rent for either 6 or 12 months, not forever, but in long enough for the landlord to feel comfortable that their tenant is a good one, if that makes sense. So it can't be an unending one, otherwise the liability will just grow and grow and grow and balloon forever. It's got to be hopefully it's the thing that makes the difference for a landlord that goes, oh, well, yes, they can afford it. They're on universal credit, but they can still afford it. And I would take them, but it's just a bit too risky. Oh, a 6-month rent guarantee? Yeah, that actually helps tip the balance. I will take them. Am I being naive and foolish to think that this is going to make any difference at all? Or do you think that this is an idea that has a possible future?
Well, I definitely think it's an idea that could gain traction. I think, just to go back to what you said at the very beginning, the way that I describe being a landlord is landlords are paid a very slim margin, and increasingly slimmer margin, to take on the risk of the tenant not paying the rent or damaging the property. So landlords' margins are based on being willing to take on that risk. And to be quite frank, the days of exceedingly wealthy landlords, that they are in decline, because, as you know, Charlie, there's been so much legislation and taxation increases in the private rented sector since around 2015. So it's becoming less and less attractive to actually be a small private landlord. And this is causing a lot of problems, which you've touched on, in that the supply of rental properties is starting to dry up, because landlords are either leaving the sector because they've had enough, or new landlords aren't coming into the sector because the margins simply aren't there for them. And if we look at a very local level, at local authorities, many local authorities do not have sufficient social housing for the numbers of people that require them. So they look to discharge their housing obligations to private landlords. So we have such a disconnect between local government and central government. So central government has done a lot of things and tweaked a lot of levers over the last 5 or 6 years to deter landlords coming into the sector and providing private sector housing. And then at a local level, you've got local authorities absolutely crying out for private sector landlords to assist with their housing needs, and to such an extent that we're now seeing some local authorities with waiting lists of over 1,500, 2,000, and these local authorities are now offering what I call a golden welcome handshake to new landlords, to encourage them to give over their properties for local authority tenants. So it's such a difficult situation for everybody within private renting, because of this supply-demand imbalance, which actually just goes straight back to the government has not built enough social housing over decades, and no government has ever fully understood the complexities of private rented sector and the different ways that could help solve these problems. And now with this Conservative government, and George Osborne in particular, who introduced a very onerous tax regime in 2015 called Section 24, it's putting the dampers on private landlords wanting to get involved. So it's just such a complex situation. But as I said, the main thing is landlords want to be compensated for taking the risk of the tenant not paying the rent or damaging the property. That is where their margin is. So if BestAgent were to offer a rental guarantee, then I think that would be very attractive to landlords. A lot of landlords are interested in having some kind of social element to their business, or wanting to help young people, or wanting to help people that have fallen on hard times in life, and they would just like that reassurance of that rental guarantee. And as you say, even if it was just for 6 months, you could possibly build a relationship with a tenant, see that they're looking after the property well, that they are responsible, and then after 6 months, maybe if they were still struggling, you could help them move on to universal credit. So I think the main thing is, to get tenants into private sector accommodation. It's much better for them than being in emergency or temporary accommodation, which actually costs the taxpayer way, way, way more than renting from a private sector landlord. And I'm just hearing some terrible stories of people, families living in one room in a hotel with no cooking facilities, and they're having to go out to a local cheap takeaway to get the evening meal for their kids. It's totally unacceptable. And I just hope that we finally get a housing minister who actually listens to industry stakeholders and starts joining up the dots of where these problems are being caused, because they're very long standing and they're only getting worse.